So every day that I've been leaving the school, after school, I get to this roundabout that's right by the school, and one lane has not been cleared of snow. And every day I think to myself, this is dangerous. It started to get on my nerves. I don't. You ever have things like that going on in your life?
Yeah.
There's lots of struggles in life. I think that's one thing we can all agree on.
Yeah. I completely agree. I completely agree.
What sort of things do you struggle with?
Oh, Father, what don't I struggle with?
I think especially as we just got out of 2020 and entered into
Yeah.
2021, there's a lot of things that are on our mind that we are struggling with. And maybe it's getting out of bed in the morning. Maybe it's getting the kids ready for school. Maybe it's just dealing with life, with masks, with all the rules and guidelines and regulations. And we don't know what to do with it sometimes. That's what we want to talk to you about today. It's a very interesting topic to talk about struggle when we're talking about Christian struggle.
Yeah, and how do we as Catholics approach suffering and difficulty? And especially when, I don't know about you guys, but I have definitely had that experience of looking up to the heavens and going, why? Why me? Why now? Why not them? Why not them? They seem to be having a good old jolly time, but here I am struggling in the trenches of life.
And sometimes if we let it get to us, it does take away our joy. And I think that's something that we have to be very careful about, is not allowing the things that go on in life to take away the joy that we want to experience. Because we should be happy people, right? We should be living in the presence of God. We should be enjoying life. We should be looking for ways that this can actually, we're going to get out of this, right? This will come to an end. Things will change. And I think that's the Christian hope that really keeps that faith alive in those most difficult moments. So we have to keep that on our minds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the most fundamental thing that we recognize as Catholics and as Christians is that struggling is a good thing. Fundamentally, no matter how uncomfortable we might be with that idea, struggling is good for us.
Definitely. Definitely is. And I think that's something that we tend to rule out of life. We like instant gratification. We like instant results for things, and sometimes it just takes time. It takes time to do things well. It takes time to get it right.
Yeah, and I think one of the common misconceptions in the world is that some suffering and struggle is somehow a punishment from God, and that couldn't be further from the truth. That couldn't be further from the truth. I think actually that, so I'm a big fan of Pinterest, and I love pinning quotes and things, and I think I read a quote a little while ago from a saint saying that there is no greater gift that God can bestow upon a person than suffering. I was like, oh, really? I don't think I want that gift.
And that is the natural reaction, right? We don't like to suffer, and that's something that we will move away from as much as we can. But when it's something we cannot avoid because it's good for us, I think that's when we have to just change things up in our own mentality and accept it and love it, right?
Yeah.
Move forward through it. We learn so much by struggling.
Yeah, agreed.
So, decided struggling is a good thing. And actually, I have an example that I think is kind of interesting, because I like to go disc golfing. It's throwing a frisbee into a basket. It's more complicated than that. There's a lot of skill involved.
Yeah. Okay. Don't ever call it frisbee golf. They
Yes.
take it very personally.
So there's something in disc golf that when you start to get over par, you're not getting a very good score. You're taking extra shots. They say you're on the struggle bus, and I always thought that was it's a fascinating term, right? You're on the struggle bus, so get off the struggle bus, right? Move on. Try to get over this. Get your mind in the game so you don't get extra strokes. And it's something that, well, actually,
Yeah.
in Catholic world, right, we should be actually getting on the struggle bus,
Yeah.
right?
You want to buy a permanent ticket for that struggle bus.
You wanna drive the struggle bus, right? You wanna be the person who is moving that bus forward, because you know that struggling is actually good for you and good for those around you. But always with that Christian joy, with hope, right, that things are going to get better, but working through it rather than trying to avoid it. Because usually when we try to avoid things that God is trying to give to us, it's kind of like Jonah, right? He's going to keep following us until we figure things out and get it right. So
yeah, and no one wants to spend a few days inside a whale. So get on the bus.
That's right. And so we have a few ideas here. First one is that struggling helps us to grow. And we might ask ourselves, well, yes, we get that, right? When the difficult moments come in life, we step up to it. We step up to the plate. We make sure that people are doing well, people around us are doing well. We want to be the one who's a bit of a hero, right? Making sure that things are right. But also in our own spiritual life, we can grow through struggle.
Yeah, and it's like anything in life that if you want to get better at something, you actually have to practice. Like,
Yep.
who would actually ever improve at soccer or disc golf if the disky golf thing that you're throwing it into, what do you call that?
Basket.
The basket.
Yeah.
The basket. If the basket that you were throwing into suddenly moved and was there where your throw was,
Yeah.
you wouldn't get better at disc golf if
No.
it kept moving.
And that's, you got to be on the struggle bus before you can get off of it, right? You
Yeah.
have to go through those pains of not getting a good score before you can actually get to the point where you're succeeding and excelling.
Yeah. So virtue is exactly like a sport. You can't get
Yes.
better at virtue if you don't practice it.
And actually, virtue as a habit is a repetition of acts, right? It's a repetition of doing those good things over and over again. It doesn't mean you always do it, because sometimes we do fail, right? But we are trying to get back on that and do it over and over again until it becomes a habit. And that's when virtue sets in.
Yeah, and how many of us have had those experiences where we've been literally forced by circumstances or by people into a certain situation that we thought before we could never handle? Say, for example, public speaking, or I don't know, any number, even parenting. Honestly, like, I hear stories of lots of people going into marriage like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can be a good parent. Well, then you're in it. And that process of going through it actually makes you into a good parent. It makes you into a good speaker. And you realize, wow, I actually have a gift in this. And I never would have known this if I hadn't been forced into it.
Yes, the challenges that we face in life, we do have the capacity. God gave us the capacity to step up to them, right? And to make successful moments out of our lives. And so that's what he wants us to do when we see those challenges, is to not run away from them, but to actually move towards them. Go toward it, embrace it, and know that it's a gift from God. Like we said before, sometimes we see a struggle and it looks like something evil, but now we know that struggle is actually supposed to be part of our lives, that it's going to make us into a better person. It does make us grow.
Yeah. I think the second thing that struggle does for us is that it reminds us that we need other people.
Oh, yeah. Like, I just think about it like the people struggling that come to visit a priest. Well, we need, like, those people need to struggle, and I need to listen, right? That's something that happens is when we're in the middle of a struggle, we're looking for someone to talk it out with, right? We're trying to figure things out, and it brings us to that relationship with others. Hopefully we all have somebody who we can open our struggles to, figure things out in life, because that is something that, okay, on the receiving end, I know that it's necessary. And then when I do have struggles in my own life, I need someone to talk it out to with as well, right? We all need that, a little bit of bouncing those things off of somebody, venting a little bit, but it's part of living together, and it does draw us back together as well.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side of that as well is sometimes struggle teaches us to rely on other people, to not just to know that we need someone to speak with, to share a journey with, but also sometimes we literally just can't do it. And that struggle is to teach us to reach out to people and ask for help. Because we all have different gifts and talents, and we're made to be complementary. We're made to be in community with one another.
Yeah, I think that's something very interesting, is you see all different kinds of personalities in this world, and every single one of them is necessary. We're a body, right? The body of Christ, and we are in this together, and we're trying to bring about the best in everyone, but we have these gifts and talents, and if we end up keeping them to ourselves or not expressing them or just running away from them, then we're not going to be accomplishing everything that we need to be accomplishing. We're not going to give that joy and peace to that other person if we keep it to ourselves. And if they keep it to themselves when we need that help, right?
Yeah, and that includes gifts like the gift of compassion, the gift of empathy. Honestly, I think sometimes when we talk about gifts and talents, we immediately think of, like Justin Bieber, or Taylor Swift with these big, shiny, like very visible talents. But not everyone is born naturally compassionate. So some people actually have a greater gift in that, a greater capacity. And this is scriptural, people. This is
Yep.
scriptural. What's that one, Father?
In 1 Corinthians, it's chapter 12, verse 26.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
That's even better than having it written down. It's just in your brain.
that's right. Okay, we got it right here before us.
Yeah, it's on our notes.
Give it a read.
If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. And that's talking about the body of Christ. Again, our connection with one another.
And so the third lesson that struggle teaches us is that we need to be detached from this world. We're not there yet, right? And I think that's the most important thing about struggle maybe is that we're not made for this earth. We are actually made for eternity, to be with God for eternity. And so living in this world, this valley of tears, is just a passageway, right? We are citizens of heaven, and we're on a journey there. And on this journey, we're going to encounter struggles. We're going to encounter many difficulties and many sicknesses and many obstacles along the way. But it's all to remind us that the eternal goal, the destination that we're going for, is eternity with heaven, with God in heaven.
Yeah, and that's so countercultural, hey, Father, that idea that, guess what, you're not going to be 100% happy in this life. Impossible. Because the only way for you to be 100% happy is in relationship with God. And the fullness of that relationship is only going to happen on the other side.
And there's something, very deep in our Christian faith that connects us to that through the passion of Christ, right? He suffered in order to open up that gate to us. And so in our suffering, in our struggle on this earth, we're uniting ourselves to him, if we are uniting ourselves to him, right? That's an important intentionality that we put into our struggles, is that, okay, Lord, I know you're giving this to me. Help me to live it with you. Help me to live it like you lived it, offering it up, knowing that I'm on a passage of love, right? Giving this maybe for someone else, maybe for my own growth, but in some way I am moving forward towards heaven through these difficulties.
Yeah. And I think, so one element of this that I think a lot of people struggle with, or at least I know I have struggled with this, is that, like that basic concept of why do bad things happen to good people? Yeah.
And so, it always makes me think of Job, right? The book of Job is all, Job suffered so much. He lost everything he had. He lost his family, he lost his land, he lost his relationships, even his friends who were trying to counsel him throughout the book of Job. They were almost telling him to give up on God, but he never did. And the book of Job never really answers the question about why we suffer. But it does teach us something. One thing very important is that God cares about us, and we need to learn to trust him because he continues to be there for Job even when all of this is happening. Now, we don't understand. Again, it's a strange book in the Bible, right? Why is all this suffering happening to someone who seems like a really good person? His friends are even trying to convince him that he must have sinned in some way, but certainly that wasn't the case. He was an upright man before God, simply was asked to do many things that weren't of his choosing, right? But that God had chosen for him.
Yeah, and ultimately, we were talking about this before, but the lesson of the book of Job is that, like Father said, it's not to explain why suffering happens to good people. It's, let me just find it here. It points you to God, who says it's not important that you understand why you are suffering. What's important is that God understands that you trust him.
Yeah.
Wow, that's challenging.
Tough lesson. But ultimately, it is the lesson we do need to learn, that struggle is good for us, right? That it's gonna make sense in the end, right? And we just need to persevere. We need to give him our best.
Yeah, and we can hold on to that truth that God is all good. So nothing that happens to us cannot ultimately be turned and used by him for our good.
Yeah, and our suffering that we receive as a gift from God is not necessarily something that is going to be the same for everybody, right? And think in our lives, sometimes we see somebody else's life is much better than ours, and we're jealous of that. But everyone receives exactly what they need from God. It's a gift, right? It's a gift that God knows that we need in order to adjust something in our lives. So I think that's also important, that don't be jealous of other people's suffering or other people's good graces.
Yeah. And I've actually been thinking about suffering a lot this week.
First-hand experiences.
I had this, I think, like this beautiful moment of realization when I read about the stories of two particularly extremely holy women. St. Agnes, her feast day was yesterday, and St. Agatha, her feast day is coming up in February. And I've been researching both of their lives for the students, and it suddenly dawned on me this idea, this thing that I've been struggling with about suffering being unfair. So I'm just going to, give me a second here. Okay, so St. Agnes and St. Agatha, their stories are almost completely parallel. It's almost like the same story. So both of them, young, beautiful, stunning women. They both commit their life to God at a very early age. Then some jealous suitors start pursuing them, whom they reject because they have made this promise to God. Okay, well, they're not going to take that because they're jealous suitors. So then they go and report these two women to the ruling powers at the time, which were very anti-Christian. And so both of them, as punishment or in order to try and get them to break their vows so that they would marry these jealous suitors, both of them were sent to brothels. And here's where their stories start to differ. St. Agnes was actually spared from all suffering in that situation, whereas St. Agatha endured it all. She endured a lot of evil. And then they were both taken back to the ruling authorities to see if they would break their promise and marry these jealous suitors, and they both said, "No, I will not." And then they were both sent away to be tortured. And St. Agnes, there's this story that they wanted to drag her around behind a horse cart through the city. And one of the legends says that her hair grew and covered her whole body so that she was unscathed. She escaped completely unharmed. Whereas St. Agatha, there's nothing of that nature. She suffered the full blunt of humanity's dark side in that jail. And looking at these two stories, I know that God is all good. And I know that both of these women loved God and loved him to the end. And both of them have very different outcomes. Like St. Agnes was spared of all physical suffering, whereas St. Agatha, she felt it all. She felt it all right until the moment that she passed and became a martyr. Yeah,
very, very different experiences of suffering, but I think the end of the story is suffering isn't going to go away for us, no matter what. Both of them suffered, but one suffered more during her lifetime. So if struggle is not going away, we better give some tips and tricks before this becomes a 20 talk to finish this up. And how do you survive suffering in your life? How do you survive this struggle bus? How do you get through life, right?
So, number one, give in.
Just admit it, right? You have to resign yourself to the fact that struggle is part of life.
Yep. And realize that if you suffer with intentionality, so that act of offering your suffering to Christ, that is the closest you will be to him in this life, because it's like you're on the other side of his cross on Calvary. And you have power in that place. Your suffering can literally save people's lives.
Definitely. And the thing that we have to do and remember is to offer it up, right? Unite yourself to Christ in your sufferings. In the struggles that you have in your everyday life, offer it to Jesus and ask him to help you to live it like he lived it.
Can I say this next one?
Yes, go.
The next tip is the struggle bus goes round and round.
It's going to come back around again, right? And that's sometimes we do have moments of consolation and we don't feel any struggles. Life seems to be going super well. We can pray well. We can manage the things that are coming at us. We're on top of our game. But then we have to know that it's going to come back again, right? We all have had that experience, right? Where all of a sudden you hit this week and you get sick and you're late for work and you can't get out of bed and all of these things happen, right? And so St. Ignatius actually speaks about consolation and desolation. And we have to remember that both consolation and desolation are good things. They are movement toward God, right? And I think the in moments of consolation is pretty obvious, right? Now, how is desolation a good thing? Well, desolation doesn't mean despair, right? The opposite of consolation is not despair, it's desolation. And desolation is when maybe we don't feel God's presence, but he is still there and he's asking us to make an act of faith. Because in moments of consolation, we should be strengthening our faith for those moments of desolation, right? So when you do feel the struggle, know that it's not because God has abandoned you. It's because he wants you to deepen your faith and to show him that you can love him even when you're not receiving the good gifts.
Yeah, and I think another important Ignatian principle here is the idea that if you've made a decision in consolation, do not change it when you are in an experience of desolation. And just to keep going with the struggle bus thing, when you're on the struggle bus, sometimes it's muddy out, and the windows get covered and you can't see out very clearly. That is not the time to change lanes across a 4-lane highway and then try to make a left turn. It's not going to go well.
Not going to work well. So I think we'll leave you with those ideas, and just know that we're praying for you all in your struggles, and I hope that you can pray for us in our struggles as we continue to move on through life and are moving towards that destination of heaven. God bless you and have a wonderful week.